The metallic crunch reverberated across the parking lot. Peter Glinsk sat motionless in his Honda Civic,
I didn't mean
eyes
for it
fixed
to
on the
happen.
rear view as steam curled from the luxury SUV that had just smashed into his bumper. The driver climbed out, tall, in an expensive suit, phone glued to his ear mid-conversation. No, I can handle this, the man was saying, his voice drifting over the asphalt. Just some nobody in a beater car. Peter eased out of the car, straightening his glasses. The man seemed familiar, though Peter couldn't place him.
How could you do this?
Clean-shaven, that confident half-smile, the sort of person who assumed he belonged anywhere. Sorry about that, the man offered, without sounding apologetic. Kevin Poulter. He thrust out his hand without taking his eyes off his screen. I'll have my insurance handle this. You weren't hurt, were you? Peter accepted the handshake, noting the pricey watch and well-kept nails. Peter Glinsk. No, I'm fine. At the name, Kevin's gaze narrowed fractionally. Glinsk? That's an uncommon name. You by any chance know Emily Glinsk? Works in real estate compliance. The question landed like a bucket of cold water. She's my wife. Kevin's smile broadened. Small world. She looked absolutely stunning at the conference last week. That blue dress really brought out her eyes. Peter felt something shift in his ribs. Emily had said she worked late last Tuesday. No conference mentioned. She certainly hadn't worn a blue dress. She'd left in her usual gray pantsuit. The conference? Peter asked, careful. At the Marriott downtown. Industry thing. She was the life of the party. Kevin chuckled, then seemed to stop himself. Anyway, here's my card. Have your guy call mine. Peter took the card. Kevin Poulter, Senior Risk Assessment Officer, Morrison & Associates, the very firm Emily worked for. Right, Peter said. I'll do that. Kevin climbed into his SUV and pulled away, leaving Peter alone in the lot clutching a business card and an uneasy feeling that something was off. That evening, Peter sat at the kitchen table going over insurance forms when Emily came in, dropping her purse on the counter with practiced ease. How was your day? She asked without looking up as she rifled through the mail. Interesting. Got rear-ended outside the university. Oh no. Are you okay? Fine. A guy named Kevin Poulter said he knows you from work. Emily's hand hesitated over an envelope for a beat. Kevin? Oh right. He's in risk assessment. Did he give you his insurance info? She asked. He mentioned seeing you at a conference last week, Tuesday night, at the Marriott. Now she looked at him, expression flat. Conference? Oh, that thing. Just a boring compliance meeting. Nothing worth mentioning. He said you looked stunning in a blue dress. Emily laughed, but it sounded brittle. He's probably mixing me up with someone else. You know how those work events are, everyone blends together. She headed upstairs and Peter heard the shower start. Her phone, left on the kitchen counter, buzzed with a text. The screen flashed KP and a preview. Can't wait for next Thursday. Peter stared until the display went dark. Then he opened his laptop and made what would later read as the first entry in an altogether different ledger. Over the next week, Peter sharpened his attention in ways he hadn't in years. Emily had always been meticulous about her appearance, but now he noticed the extra effort on certain days, the careful makeup, the way she checked her phone and flipped it face down when he entered, the small shifts in her schedule, more late nights, weekend errands that stretched suspiciously long. As the university's assistant controller, Peter had spent 15 years training himself to spot anomalies. Numbers that refused to add up, patterns that only revealed themselves to someone patient enough to look. He turned that same clinical focus on his wife. He started with finances. Credit card bills, bank statements, loan paperwork. What he uncovered made his stomach drop. Emily had taken a $25,000 personal loan in both their names. Yet that money never hit their joint accounts. She'd opened a separate credit card Peter had never seen. When he finally chased down the statements, they showed dinners at pricey restaurants during alleged late work nights, hotel charges, and lingerie purchases from boutiques she had never visited before. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Peter sat in his home office with spreadsheets bathing his face in light and felt a hard chill settle into his chest. The numbers told a tale he didn't want to hear. But numbers didn't lie. Never. His daughter Sasha knocked on the doorframe. Dad, you okay? At 17, Sasha carried Emily's sharp cheekbones and Peter's thoughtful eyes. She'd always been closer to her mother, seeing Peter as steady if a little dull, the parent who helped with homework while Emily organized adventures. "Just work stuff," Peter said, downplaying the spreadsheet. "What are you doing up?" "Couldn't sleep. Mom's been weird lately, don't you think?" Peter studied his daughter. "Weird how?" "I don't know. Happy, I guess, like secretly happy. She hums when she thinks no one's listening. And she's been buying new clothes. Expensive stuff." Sasha shrugged. "Maybe she got a promotion." "Maybe," Peter said. The next morning, Emily announced she'd be working late again. "Big compliance review," she said, kissing his cheek, lips tasting of fresh lipstick. "Don't wait up." After she left, Peter made a choice that would have been unthinkable a month earlier. He called in sick to work and followed his wife. Emily's office sat downtown in a sleek glass tower that housed Morrison & Associates among other firms. Peter parked across the street and waited. At 11:47 a.m., Emily came out and walked 3 blocks to a coffee shop. Kevin Poulter was already inside, tucked into a corner booth. Peter watched through the window as his wife slid into the seat opposite Kevin. She leaned in, laughing at something he said. Kevin reached across and touched her hand. Emily didn't pull away. They sat for 43 minutes. Peter timed it. When they left, Kevin's hand rested on the small of Emily's back as he steered her toward the parking garage. Peter followed at a distance, keeping several cars behind as Kevin's SUV, now fixed from their accident, pulled from downtown and headed toward the interstate. The Fairmont Hotel sat 20 minutes from the city, upscale without being ostentatious, the kind of place business travelers chose when discretion mattered more than flash. Peter watched from the lot as Emily and Kevin walked into the lobby together. They didn't reappear for 3 hours. That night, Emily returned at her usual late hour, griping about the compliance review, and asked Peter how his day went. "Quiet," he said. "Just worked on some budget projections." She nodded and went upstairs to shower again. Peter opened a fresh spreadsheet at the kitchen table. This one wasn't for the university. It was an account of a different sort, a balance sheet for his marriage with columns for lies told, trust lost, and betrayal accumulating interest. In the weeks that followed, Peter settled into a routine. He'd call in sick, tail Emily, and record everything: times, places, how long they stayed. He learned Thursdays were their hotel days. Tuesdays were for lunches that ended at Kevin's. Linda had begun to grow suspicious about the extra nights her husband was spending in Columbus. Kevin had been spinning a tale about a long-term project that supposedly required him to keep a nearby apartment. But Linda was starting to press him with questions that made him uncomfortable. Peter rang Linda's office in Boston, presenting himself as a worried co-worker of Kevin's who'd noticed oddities in their shared project files. He suggested she might want to take a look at the credit card statements for accounts Kevin could access. He made sure his tone sounded concerned rather than accusatory, just a colleague looking out for another family. The third move aimed directly at Emily. Peter had installed monitoring software on their home router, giving him visibility into everything Emily did online. He found she'd been searching for divorce attorneys and had even booked a consultation the following week. She'd also been shifting money from their joint savings into her personal account. Small amounts, but steady. Peter moved the funds back, then changed the account passwords. When Emily tried to transfer money again, she discovered she no longer had access. She never mentioned it to Peter, and that silence confirmed his suspicions about her plans. But Peter's most graceful maneuver involved the private investigator who'd been tailing Kevin for his wife. Peter reached out to the investigator, posing as a concerned friend who'd noticed odd behavior from Kevin. He passed along some of the financial data he'd dug up, hinting that Kevin might be in trouble that could affect those close to him. The investigator appreciated the tip. He'd been hired to collect proof of Kevin's infidelity, but evidence of financial wrongdoing would be far more useful to his client. Within 2 weeks, Kevin's carefully managed life started to collapse. The internal audit at Morrison Associates widened from a routine expense check into a comprehensive probe. Linda Poulter turned up in Columbus unannounced, armed with credit card bills and bank records that sketched an unflattering story of her husband's conduct. Peter watched everything play out from his rented office across the street. He noticed Kevin arriving earlier and staying later, clearly juggling multiple fires. He watched Emily grow more agitated, her phone calls multiplying and getting urgent. The breaking point arrived on a Thursday. Peter took his usual spot in the hotel bar. But this time the meeting between Kevin and Emily was short and intense. Even from across the lobby, Peter could see them arguing. Emily left after 20 minutes, her cheeks flushed with anger. That evening she came home earlier than she had in weeks. "How was work?" Peter asked, looking up from the book he was pretending to read. "Stressful," Emily replied. "There's some kind of audit happening. Everyone's on edge." "Audit? That sounds serious." "It's probably nothing. You know how these corporate things go. Lots of drama over paperwork." But Peter could see the fear in her eyes. Emily was smart enough to know audits didn't happen for no reason, and she was likely wondering what Kevin might have done that could drag her down. Over the next several days, Peter watched his wife's certainty crumble. She jumped at every phone ring. She worked late, but Peter knew she wasn't meeting Kevin. Kevin was too busy trying to salvage his own career to carry on the affair. The final domino fell when Linda Poulter filed for divorce and simultaneously alerted the FBI about her husband's financial behavior. Kevin was arrested at his office on a Friday morning, charged with embezzlement, wire. Apartment, a glossy high-rise that cost more than Peter's annual salary. He uncovered facts about Kevin Emily probably didn't know. Kevin was married too, his wife living in Boston while he kept a Columbus apartment supposedly for work. Peter even dug up Kevin's gambling debts by breaching a poorly secured personal email account. Kevin Poulter was far less polished than he appeared. His apartment lease ran through his firm. His car payments were 3 months overdue, and he'd been borrowing money from Emily, Peter's money, as it turned out, to plug losses from underground poker games. The final piece clicked into place on a Thursday in October. Peter had stationed himself in the hotel bar, nursing coffee and reading a newspaper while Emily and Kevin occupied their usual room above. A young woman stormed into the lobby, clearly upset, and went straight to the front desk. "I'm looking for Kevin Poulter," she said loud enough for Peter to hear. "I know he's here. He was supposed to meet me 2 hours ago." The clerk muttered something about privacy policies, but she wasn't having it. "His wife hired me to find him," she announced. "Private investigator. So either you help me or I start checking every room." Peter folded his paper and left the bar, out into the parking lot. He rang Emily's phone. "Hey, honey," he said when she picked up, his voice a touch breathless. "How's the compliance review going?" "Oh, tedious. We're probably going to be here for another few hours." "That's too bad. I was hoping we could grab dinner. Maybe tomorrow. I really need to focus on this." "Of course. Love you." "Love you too." Peter hung up and sat in his car, watching the hotel entrance. 23 years of marriage. 17 years since Sasha was born. A mortgage, joint accounts, vacations, parent-teacher conferences. All built on a foundation evidently more fragile than he'd believed. His phone buzzed with a text from Emily. Review running even later than expected. Probably won't be home until after midnight. It was 4:17 p.m. That night Peter didn't go home. He drove to a 24-hour diner and sat in a corner booth, sipping coffee and thinking. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, kept topping off his cup without being asked. "Rough day," she said around 11 p.m. "You could say that. Want to talk about it?" Peter looked at a stranger who had no reason to care and felt something inside him fracture. "I think my wife is having an affair," he said. The words hung like smoke. Once out, they couldn't be recalled. "I'm sorry," the waitress said. "That's got to hurt. The strange thing is, I'm not even surprised. Looking back I can see all the signs. I just chose not to see them. What are you going to do?" Peter stared into his coffee. "I honestly don't know." Even as he said it, he knew that wasn't entirely true. He was an accountant, familiar with balance sheets, profit and loss, the math of cause and effect. Emily had spent months running their marriage into deficit. Lies where honesty belonged, betrayal where there should have been trust. It was time to balance the books. The next morning, Peter handed in his resignation to the university, telling his supervisor he was taking early retirement to pursue consulting work. It wasn't a total falsehood. He planned to consult, but on a very specific project. With his university access cut off, he had to improvise his surveillance. He rented a small office opposite Emily's building using his retirement savings. He bought high-end cameras and taught himself digital tracking tools. He studied Kevin's routines, financials, and past with the same meticulous care he had once applied to university budgets. What he unearthed made it clear Kevin Poulter was a fragile facade. The gambling debts were deeper than Peter's first estimate. Kevin had been siphoning small amounts from client accounts, subtle, concealed, and Peter's trained eye caught the anomalies. Kevin was running an elaborate expense account scam too, charging personal items to corporate cards and doctoring reimbursements. Most damning, Kevin had been embezzling from a charity account Morrison and Associates managed. The scheme was clever. Transfer funds to a shell company, let them sit exactly 31 days, move them to another account, then return most of the original fund. The missing slices accumulated in an offshore account Kevin likely assumed was untraceable. Peter traced it in 6 hours. Armed with those findings, he began to craft a response. If Emily wanted to treat trust like a game, he'd show her how an expert played. His first move was quiet. He set up an anonymous email and tipped off Morrison and Associates' internal audit. Nothing flashy, just a nudge that they might want to inspect odd patterns in expense reports. He included enough detail to pique interest without pointing a finger straight at Kevin. The second move was more personal. Peter had learned that Kevin's wife in Boston. Fraud and tax evasion. Peter watched from his office window as Kevin was led out of the building in handcuffs. Emily was nowhere to be seen. She'd called in sick that morning, claiming the flu. That weekend Peter made his decisive move. He printed every document he'd collected over the previous 2 months. Financial records, surveillance photos, email printouts, phone logs, hotel receipts. He arranged them in a manila folder with the same meticulous care he'd once used for university audit files. Then he sat Emily at their kitchen table and set the folder in front of her. "I know," he said plainly. Emily looked at the folder without opening it. Her expression cycled through surprise, denial, calculation, and finally resignation. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Since the car accident. Kevin mentioned seeing you in a blue dress at a conference you never told me about." Emily opened the folder and began flipping through the pages. Peter watched her face as she saw the surveillance shots, the hotel bills, the transfer records. "This is a lot of work," she said softly. "I'm good at my job. What do you want?" The question hung there like a dare. Peter had been asking himself the same thing for weeks. What did he want? An apology, an explanation, his wife back. "I want you to understand what you've cost," he said. Emily looked up. "What I've cost? 23 years of marriage. Sasha's respect for her mother. My ability to trust anyone ever again. Kevin's career, though I suppose he managed that himself. His marriage. Your job eventually. My job." Peter reached across the table and opened the folder to a particular page. "Morrison and Associates doesn't know yet that you've been having an affair with Kevin, but they will. Internal audit investigations are very thorough. They'll discover that you've been covering for his expense account irregularities, helping him manipulate compliance reports, and using company resources for personal meetings." Emily's face drained of color. "You can't prove that." "I can prove you've been meeting him during work hours, using company time for personal business. I can prove you've been in his apartment during the day when you claim to be in compliance meetings. I can prove you took out loans using forged documents, loans that were used to pay Kevin's gambling debts." The last claim wasn't entirely accurate, but Peter had learned the most persuasive deceptions were built on kernels of truth. "You're bluffing," Emily said, but the voice had lost its edge. Peter reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He scrolled until he found the photo he wanted. Emily and Kevin entering Kevin's apartment building at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday, clearly visible and time-stamped. "I have hundreds of these," he said. "Different places, different dates, all during hours you were supposed to be at work." Emily stared at the image, and Peter watched the moment she realized how utterly she'd been outmaneuvered. "What do you want?" she asked again. "I want you to leave," Peter replied. "Tonight. Pack what you can fit in a suitcase and find somewhere else to live. I want you to sign divorce papers that give me full custody of Sasha and leave you with exactly what you brought into this marriage 20 troa years ago." "That's not fair." "Fair?" Peter laughed, surprised by how cold it sounded. "You stole from our joint accounts to pay your lover's debts. You lied to me every day for months. You were planning to divorce me and take half of everything I've worked for, including money I didn't even know you'd stolen. What about any of this is fair? Emily closed the folder and pushed it away. I never meant for it to happen, but it did happen. And now there are consequences. Need time to think. No, Peter said. You need to pack. That night Emily filled 2 suitcases with clothes and left to stay with her sister across town. Peter helped carry the bags to her car, maintaining the same quiet civility he'd shown her for 2 decades. What will you tell Sasha? Emily asked. The truth. She's old enough to understand that actions have consequences. Emily drove off, and Peter stood in the driveway watching her taillights fade. He felt hollow, but oddly relieved. The uncertainty was finished. The pretending ended. An hour later Sasha returned from a friend's place and immediately noticed her mother's absence. Where's Mom? Peter sat his daughter down in the living room and laid out the facts. He showed her some of the evidence. Not the photos, but the financial records proving Emily had been taking from their family to support another man. Sasha listened without interrupting. When Peter finished, she was silent for a long time. I knew something was wrong, she finally said. The way she looked at her phone all the time. The way she seemed happier when you weren't around. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Are you getting divorced? Yes. Can I stay with you? Peter felt a tightness in his chest loosen a little. Of course. In the months that followed, Peter's predictions proved true. Morrison and Associates finished their internal review and fired Emily for violating company policies. She wasn't criminally charged. Peter had been careful to frame her involvement as naive rather than criminal, but her career in compliance was effectively finished. Kevin pleaded guilty to multiple charges and received a 4-year federal sentence. His wife divorced him and returned to Boston with their children. His apartment was seized as part of asset forfeiture and his luxury car repossessed. Emily found work as a receptionist at a small insurance office, earning less than half her previous salary. She moved into a studio apartment and drove a 10-year-old sedan. Peter learned these details through mutual friends who assumed he should feel pity for his ex-wife. He didn't. The divorce was finalized in February. Emily signed the papers without contesting Peter's terms. She understood that fighting would only expose more of her secrets. Peter kept the house, the savings, accounts, and custody of Sasha. Emily received her personal belongings and half the proceeds from selling her car to cover legal fees. Peter went back to work as controller at a smaller university across town. The pay was better, and he took satisfaction in applying his skills at a place that valued accuracy and accountability. 6 months after the divorce, Emily appeared at Peter's house on a Saturday morning. Sasha was at a friend's, and Peter was in the garden, a hobby he'd taken up since the split. We need to talk, Emily said. Peter straightened, brushing dirt from his hands. Emily looked older and thinner. Her hair was shorter and grayer, and she wore clothes from discount shops rather than department stores. About what? He asked. About what you did to Kevin and to me. Peter wiped his hands on a towel and studied his ex-wife's face. What I did? You destroyed us systematically, like we were a problem you needed to solve. You destroyed yourselves. I just made sure there were consequences. Kevin lost everything. His job, his family, his freedom. And for what? Because you couldn't handle that I was happy with someone else. Peter felt a cold knot in his stomach. Happy. Yes, happy. For the first time in years I felt alive. Kevin made me feel beautiful, desired, important, and you couldn't stand that. Peter looked at his ex-wife and for a moment saw the woman he'd fallen for in college. Confident, vibrant. But that woman had made her choices, and choices carried consequences. You stole money from our family to pay for your happiness, Peter said quietly. You lied to me every day for months. You were planning to leave me with nothing while you started a new life with money you'd taken from our joint accounts. I would have found a way to pay it back. With what? Kevin's embezzled funds. His gambling winnings. Emily's face crumpled. He wasn't a bad person. He just made mistakes. He was taking from a charity account, Peter. Money that was supposed to help sick children. Whatever mistakes I made in our marriage, I never stole from sick children. You didn't have to destroy him completely. Peter looked at the woman he'd lived with for more than 20 years and realized he felt nothing for her. Not love, not hate, not even pity. She was a stranger whose moral compass pointed a way he couldn't follow. "I didn't destroy Kevin," Peter said. "I simply made sure people knew who he really was. If that destroyed him, that says more about him than it does about me." Emily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "What about us? What about Sasha?" "Sasha is fine. She's doing well in school. She has friends, and she's learned the difference between people who keep promises and people who break them. She won't even take my calls anymore. That's her choice. She's 17, old enough to decide for herself what kind of relationship she wants with her mother." Emily stared at him a long time. "You've changed," she said. "You used to be kind." Peter considered that. "I used to be naive. There's a difference. I never meant to hurt you. But you did hurt me. And you would have kept hurting me if I hadn't stopped you. That's the difference between us, Emily. When I realized what kind of person you'd become, I did something about it." Emily turned to go, then paused. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you just talked to me? If you told me you knew about Kevin and asked me to end it?" Peter thought seriously. "Would you have ended it?" Emily was quiet a long time. "I don't know." "Then you have your answer." After she left, Peter sat on his porch and replayed the conversation. He wondered if he should feel guilty for Kevin's prison sentence, for Emily's diminished circumstances, for the chain of events he'd set off. He didn't feel guilty. He felt something that had been missing for months. Peace. That evening Sasha came home and found Peter reading on the porch. "Mom stopped by earlier," she said as she settled into the chair beside him. "I know. She wanted to talk." "What did she say?" "She thinks you were too harsh in how you handled things." Sasha was quiet for a moment. "Do you think you were?" Peter marked his place in the book and looked at his daughter. At 17 she already showed signs of the woman she'd become. Thoughtful, direct, unafraid of hard questions. "I think I was exact," he said. "Your mother made choices, and I made sure those choices had appropriate consequences. Maybe someone else would have handled it differently, but I handled it the way I knew how. Like an accountant." Peter smiled in a very accountant way. Sasha leaned back. "I'm glad you did it the way you did. If you'd forgiven her and taken her back, I would have spent the rest of my life wondering when she was going to lie to us again." Peter reached over and squeezed his daughter's hand. "You don't have to choose sides." "I'm not choosing sides. I'm choosing to live with the parent who tells the truth." As the sun set over their quiet street, Peter reflected on the year behind them. He'd lost a wife but kept his daughter. He'd lost trust in people but gained a clearer sense of his own strength. He'd lost his naivety and acquired something more valuable: the knowledge he could protect what mattered. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hi, I'm Sarah from the book club. We met at the coffee shop last week. Would you like to have dinner sometime?" Peter stared at the message for a long beat, then deleted it without replying. He wasn't ready for that yet. Maybe he never would be, but for now he had his daughter, his work, and his peace of mind. After everything that had happened, that was enough. He opened his book and read as the stars appeared overhead. For the first time in months, Peter Glinsk felt exactly where he belonged.